With QDS, you can administer your questionnaire in multiple languages. This tutorial video will provide an introduction in how to do this. Adding multiple languages is simplified in QDS because each questionnaire has only one set of specifications, that is, only one Design Studio file for any number of languages. All programming elements such as skip, edit, and marker elements for branching patterns, as well as all format and comment elements, apply to all languages. However, any text to be seen by an interviewer or respondent is language specific. For example, all question, response, and message text and all applications such as CAPI and ACASI control files and documentation such as codebooks and RTF questionnaires are built separately for each language. You will enter language-specific translations only for text viewed by the respondent or interviewer, which includes question text, response text, tags for numeric items, information element text, edit element messages, and response card text. For language-specific text in documentation, section header element text, and report element contents. Most languages are supported by QDS, including Latin alphabet languages, non-Latin alphabet such as Russian, Chinese, or Thai. There are some limitations. QDS does not support Arabic, Hebrew, Farsi, or Urdu, vertical fonts, or language-specific numeric digits. To add a new language, go to Language, Add, then select language from the pop-up list. Note that this list is generated by the Windows operating system and cannot be modified. If you're using a language not listed, you can pick one from a similar region. The selected language provides labeling for application and documentation builds, as well as optional settings for formatting associated with that language. Also, from that same menu, there is an option to delete a language by going to Language Delete. However, it is critically important to verify that the correct language is currently selected, which you can see in the Language Toolbar drop-down. If you need to switch languages, go to Language Select and change the language. It's very important to never delete the default language, which is determined by your Windows regional system settings. For example, most US-based QDS users, the default language will be English. In this case, deleting the English language could corrupt your Design Studio file. You might ask, why delete a language? You can do this in order to avoid errors regarding missing translations when you validate. To validate without errors while you are still in the process of entering translations, you can temporarily delete the incomplete language. Note that deleting a language will not permanently remove that language or any translations entered so far. You can simply add back the deleted language to complete your translations. When the language is added back to your specifications file, any previously entered translations will still be there. To get started entering or copying in translations, you can set up an interface to make this process easier. Select Window, New Window to open a second window for the current survey, then select Window Tile Horizontal or Tile Vertical to arrange windows so that you can see both at the same time. Next, click on the second window to bring it into focus. Go to Language Select or use the Language drop-down to select your language. Now you have one Design Studio file open, but with two windows, one showing each language. If you had more than two languages, you could repeat this process with additional windows. Then you can open a data or information element in each window. The text box for the new language will be empty, and you can enter or copy and paste in your translation. For response types, such as a Pick 1, go to the Response Set tab. Again, the new language response text will be blank, and again, just enter or copy and paste in translations for each response option. To enter more translations, select the next element arrow to automatically scroll to the next element for both windows and continue entering translations. You'll often have responses that repeat throughout the survey. For response cards, go to Tools, Response Cards, and enter translations for each card in your questionnaire. For response image buttons such as yes, no, and male, female, the translations need to be created in the buttons. English buttons are included with your QDS installation at this default location. For example, these are included in the English yes, no buttons. You can add button files for any number of other languages into their own folder locations. Nova's website does include downloadable bitmap button files for several other languages. See instructions in the online help for how to install and use those. For system keywords such as don't know, refused, or next question, go to Language Translations, select Language, and click the Edit button. Select Translation Categories, and then update text from the default language to the new language. Note that the same approach can be used to change the default language for English, that is, select English as the language to be translated and enter alternate text. For example, you might change refuse to answer to decline. Now we will do a demonstration of adding a language and translations for a sample file. We will first start by adding a new language by going to the menu and to Language and then Add. This opens the new Interview Language box. As mentioned, this list is generated by the Windows operating system and cannot be modified. If you do need to use a language that's not listed, you can pick one from a similar region. Remember that the language selection only impacts the two-letter label that's assigned for language-specific files and optional settings for keyboard layouts and formatting. After choosing your language, which here we're going to go down to Spanish and select Traditional Sort, and then click OK. Then, to make it easier to enter translations, you can first open a new window by going to Window and then New Window, and then Window, Tile Vertical or Tile Horizontal to arrange them. Since we just added our new language, you can see that one window is for the English and the other is for the Spanish. If you needed to change the active language for a window, you can go either to Language and then select from the drop-down, or use the toolbar drop-down as well. Note that either of those will show all languages currently added to the questionnaire. If you ever want to temporarily delete a language, you can do that by going to Language and then Delete. You may want to do that to avoid building errors before you have completed entering translations. However, you never want to delete the default language, and that is the one determined by your Windows regional settings. To begin entering translations, we'll first go to the first data element, which is subject, and we'll go ahead and open that in each window. And you can see that in the Spanish language window, the text of question is empty, but everything else is the same for the English window. For example, variable name, variable label, response type, all that is the same for both languages. So all we need to do is add the question text. We're going to do that by just copying it in, and after doing that we'll go to the response set tab for each window and answer yes when we are prompted to save. Because this is a numeric item, there is an optional tag which we will go ahead and enter as well. This completes entering translations for this item, so we can use the down element arrow from the bar here to continue. And again, just always say yes when prompted to save. The next element that is not a comment element is a section header, and this text will appear in any language-specific documentation such as codebooks and rich text format questionnaires. Again, we are going to copy in our translation here for the text for heading, and then again use that down element arrow to save and continue. The next item is an information element. And here you only need to input translations for the text box, which will copy in and continue. Next, we reach a pick one data element. First, we'll copy in the question text and then go to the response set tab. And again, as mentioned, always selecting save when we are prompted. And we can enter in each response category separately. And you'll do this in exactly the same way as you would enter the text the first time for the first language. And after we're done, we can just continue again by selecting that down element arrow. The next element we encounter is a skip element. Because they contain no language-specific text, no changes are needed at all, and so we can just continue. And the next item is a text type data element, and we'll go ahead and copy in that translation and continue. Here to a rating type question, and for this type as well we will need to enter on the response set tab the low anchor and the high anchor, and so we will do that by copying those in. At this point, after we have completed that, we're going to go ahead and just select OK. For these next items, we have already entered the translations, and you'll notice that the response type is a response card, and that has to be entered in a different way. It cannot be entered on the response set tab. So to do that, we'll exit out of the data element, and then we'll go to Tools, Response Cards from the menu. Select the card that you're interested in entering the translations for and click the Edit button. Then you're going to add the translations in just the way you would for a regular data element. So we'll go ahead and enter these. It's very convenient to have response cards for repeating responses in multiple language questionnaires because it means that there are fewer translations that actually have to be entered. And once you've completed doing that, we'll click OK and then close. If you did have multiple response cards in your questionnaire, you would continue entering translations for them all in that same way. Regarding other types of translations that need to be entered, as mentioned, you will not need to enter any for skip elements. For edit elements, however, you will need to enter translations if they include a message. For example, for this edit element in our questionnaire, we do have an item that requires a message, and we will go ahead and enter that in, and then select OK. After all of your translations have been entered, you'll go to Tools and then Validate to confirm. The QDS error window will list any that you might have missed. For example, we did apparently miss one, and if we click on that particular error message, it will take us to the element where the translation needs to be entered. And so we will go ahead and enter that and click OK, and then we'll go to Tools Validate again, and it will let us know that no errors were found. Next, you will always need to open up and review the keyword translations for all of your added languages. To do this, go to Language and then Translations from the menu. Select the language and click the Edit button. You'll see that all of the fields contain a default English translation. In general, you only need to change the ones that you plan to use. Like this, for example, for yes and no, which will show in codebook and RTF documentation, as well as for your special codes such as don't know, refuse to answer, and not applicable. If you are doing CAPI or ACASI interviewing, you will want to go to the Automated Interview section to update translations for buttons such as Previous Question, Next Question, or Repeat the Question as shown here. If there are keyword translations for text that you know will never be used in your survey, such as probe or view picture, you can just leave the English. You'll also want to review the text in other sections and enter what will apply to your other language questionnaires. For example, under Append to Question Text, what you would like to use for Choose One, check all that apply, or if you're using it, rank from first to last. Under Date and Time, you can enter translations for years, months, weeks, and days, and similar for under times, hours, minutes, or seconds. There are also options under Error Messages, as well as Keyboard. If you are using a non-Latin language, you may want to add your non-Latin letters to the keyboard interface. Under Paper Interviews, you can often leave these in English since this text is only used for documentation purposes. When you're done, select OK to save your changes. As mentioned, you can also go to the English language to update those keywords from the defaults if you would like. In that case, you would select English and then Edit, and you might want to change something like the default for Refuse to Answer to Decline. And then after you've made those changes, again, can select OK to continue. After completing all of your keyword translations, you can proceed to building language-specific files. To build each language-specific application or documentation file type, first be sure to make sure that the language is active by going to Language Select and choosing your language. Or, again, you can select the language from the toolbar drop-down. Next, go to the Build menu and select the application or documentation file type. Note that the default names will include a 2-letter language label. For example, ES for Spanish and EN for English, shown here in orange to illustrate. You'll generally want to update build options by going to either Options Build from the menu, or you can select the Options button during the build process. Note that build options may be set to be language specific. Just be sure that the target language is active when setting. Language specific options that you may want to set include, under Operations, select Load Default Keyboard for Language and format dates, times, and numbers for selected language. Note that these options are not checked by default. Under External Files, if you are using language-specific image buttons for yes, no, or any other responses, you'll need to update the path for Directory for Button Bitmap files. See our online help for more information about where those files should be located. Next, we'll demonstrate setting build options and building language-specific files. To set options and build language files, first be sure and make sure that that language is active by going to Language and then Select, or select it from the toolbar. Next, we'll go to Select Build Options by going to Options and then Build from the menu. And for example, under Operations for CAPI, we can check the Automatically Load Default Keyboard Layout for associated language. That'll facilitate typing in responses. And then check the Format Dates, Times, and Numbers according to the associated language. That's so that those types of responses will be formatted according to that language rather than the default. And note that that formatting does come from Windows Regional and Language Settings. Under External Files for CAPI, it's very important to update the path under Directory for bitmap files to a language-specific folder. Here, that is an ES folder for Spanish. As mentioned previously, this is for any language-specific image buttons, for example, yes and no. Once again, see our online help for more information about where those files should be located. And note that QDS website includes downloadable bitmaps for several other languages in the sample files section. Then, to build any language-specific files, again, after you confirm that the correct language is showing, go to Build and then choose your application or documentation type. We will select CAPI. Again, you can see that the default names will include the language label here, that is in Sample Survey ES for Spanish, CAPI.QPI. And you can always change that label if you prefer. And you could also select the option button there as well to update those options, and then select Save. And then you would follow that same process for building any other types, for example, to build your questionnaire or codebooks. Finally, note that because question and response text is always different for each language, data collected in multiple languages will always be marked as distinct versions in the Warehouse Manager. This is true even if the only difference between versions is the language in which it is presented. See the tutorial video on working with multiple versions to learn how to work with these in the Warehouse Manager. To learn even more about working with multiple languages, see QDS Online Help and other QDS resources.